The opinions expressed on two-way traffic are those of Darren Coleman and are for general information purposes only. It does not constitute any legally binding engagement between the podcasters and anyone else. Always check with your advisors to obtain your own tax or investment advice. Welcome to Two-Way Traffic with Darren Coleman of Portage Cross-Border Wealth Management. In this series, Darren aims to guide you through the complexities, complications, implications, and most importantly, the advantages of having money and family on both sides of the border. On this episode, Darren welcomes back immigration lawyer Véronique Malka to discuss the potential issues for cross-border newlyweds. That and a whole lot more.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Two-Way Traffic. My name is Darren Coleman, and I'm an investment advisor, senior portfolio manager with Raymond James in Toronto, Canada. And we run Portage Wealth, which is a cross-border Canada-U.S. investment and wealth management advisory firm. And today I'm joined once again with Véronique Malka. So hi, Véronique.
Hello, Darren.
How are you?
Very well, very well. Really excited to be doing this with you again.
So you're founder of Canadian Law Group. So really quick introduction to the work that you do, please.
Sure. So I founded Canadian Law Group, which is a Canadian cross-border firm located in the New York area. We started this in 2005, way before it was trendy to be working remote. But Canadian, now it's like, oh, big deal, no big deal. But back then, I was a Canadian lawyer in the U.S., focusing on bringing people to Canada and, of course, receiving a lot of inquiries about people moving south when they need to come to the U.S.
Yeah, and this is an area that both of us have found have been growing like crazy. So we help people when their money's in one country and they're in the other. You help people that want to be in the other country. And today we're going to talk about a very unique situation that we see a lot. And I don't think people realize it's nearly as complicated as it actually is. And this is, I've married an American, or I would like to marry an American. So we're going to talk about cross-border relationships today. So fallen in love, I have a spouse, they're going to have a spouse. I'm Canadian, they're in the United States. Isn't this just simple? I mean, I've watched that Ryan Reynolds, Sandra Bullock movie called The Proposal. So don't we just have to meet with somebody and show, pictures of our love affair if it really was real? And then if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's on Netflix. It's a great thing to watch on a rainy weekend, which we have in Toronto today. So someone wants to get married. How does the border get in the way of any of that? Or is it a problem or not a problem? What do you see?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, this is an issue that I've been tackling for years and years and years. And back in my days when I was still in Toronto, I wrote an article for a magazine back then called Around Town, and it was called The I-Do's of Immigration.
Nice.
And I remember that because specifically I was getting calls about people saying, hey, we got separated at the border. My wife-to-be or my wife or my husband-to-be or my husband is an American and I'm a Canadian. And I thought, hey, let's just get married. And once we get to the U.S., he or she can sponsor me. Not correct. That is
you can't just say, no, this is my, and we go together. Like, why is that a problem?
Well, no, because really the act requires, and this is the same, I should mention, for Canada inbound. And okay. I want to preface it. I'm going to put on my lawyer hat right now and really firmly say, this is not your legal advice.
No, it's just a couple friends talking here.
That's right. That's right. And every situation is so different. So it's important to get the right advice. But in general, you have to have the right to enter the country you're going into, whether it be U.S. or Canada, and the right visa, the right status to enter if you're going to be staying there permanent. Okay. So you can't come in at the border and say, I'm going in with a permanent intent and not have the visa that's required for that. For that matter, you might need a temporary intent or a visa or a job or something, but you can't just show up at the border and drive through. Only as a visitor can you do that if you're Canadian or American.
So the person at the border is worse than your future in-laws. Like, what's your intention here with my daughter or my son? Like, is this permanent? And you're like, I got married. Like, hey, I put a ring on it. Is that not that? Why isn't that enough, actually?
Why is it not enough? There's a process. I mean, the legislation is drafted in such a way that, if we didn't have that kind of safeguard, people would just walk in, change their mind, and adopt any kind. There would be no immigration system if you think about it, because it would be porous, open borders, and people can do what they want whenever they want. So the way they drew the lines was to set up a system whereby you have to apply before you come to the border. And there are different ways to do that. So if you marry an American, there are ways to do it. If you're going to marry an American, there are ways to do it. Different routes, different visas. But it's one of those things you want to tackle the same way you tackle preparation for marriage, an engagement, wedding hall, whatever it might be. The visa situation and your immigration status is one of these very important preparations.
So this is an important distinction. So why don't we take this in a couple of steps? So the first one is, I'm planning to marry someone I'm American, they're Canadian, or vice versa. There's work that they ought to be doing or advice they ought to be seeking about that before they get married. Is that right? Or do they not need to do any of this until they're actually married?
No. So I mean, I don't like to get involved in people's wedding plans, and certainly, picking out the meal is more important for the, engaged couple possibly and more romantic than planning immigration. But at some point in the engagement process, it's something that the couple has to turn their mind to. I can't tell you when, but certainly not right just before you load up the car and come to the border. That's the problem. That's what we encounter. And what a person might encounter, and I want to be very clear about this, is, let's say, going into the U.S. is CBP at the border saying, "Oh, you're both coming in, and what's your intention?" "Well, we're going to live here. My husband is American, or my fiance is American, and I'm coming to live with him." Big mistake, because the officer will say, "You're declaring a permanent intent, but you don't have the right visa for that. And therefore, I'm going to let him, the American, in, but you cannot come in." And
so you better get an Uber.
That can be a very big problem.
So that's important, because if they're anticipating, they're going to get married, they're going to pick which country to have their lives in, they're going to have to talk to somebody like you in advance of actually making that trip and saying, what do I need to have prepared? And is it a matter of getting the right visa? Like, what are some of the elements that they would have a conversation with you about to make sure they've got it in the right way? Like, is it a matter of, like, there's one version if I just want to live with them, or do I automatically have a right to work? What are some of the considerations?
So very good questions. So you have a number of different visas available. If you're engaged and you have time and you want to be able to sponsor your spouse to be, you're going to use something called a K-1 visa going into the U.S. In going into Canada, you would sponsor the person from outside of Canada. The problem there is that you're dealing possibly between 10 and 18 months of wait time for that visa.
Okay.
Right. So it's always the process.
So that's important too, is what timelines, right? It's not just a matter of, I'm going to wait in line and fill out the paperwork in 20 minutes to have this. You have quite a long time to prepare.
Right. So sometimes an engagement will be that long and it works. Other times, some people might decide, you know what? No, I don't want to wait that long. Our marriage can be for two. They've been living together, or their cultural norms mandate that they'll be married faster. So in that case, the K may not be feasible. And that's what we often see. We see people saying, we've been engaged this long. Had we known, we would have done a K visa. But now the wedding is either next week or it was a month ago. And now what do we do? So that becomes a little more delicate. The I-130 is what we call the family sponsorship in the U.S., or similarly, we have something equivalent into Canada, is a process that is also going to take time. So how does a person actually who is engaged or recently married come to the U.S. without having done the proper sponsorship? And that's where lawyers have to be extremely careful when counseling clients on that situation. Okay? I can't stress this enough. A lawyer cannot say to somebody, "Oh, just go to the border and misrepresent." Tell the officer, "Oh, you know what? I'm just going in.
I'm just shopping.
The guy bugging me in the car behind me, I don't know him." Those are things that lawyers are out. This is not something that would ever be said by me. Okay.
No, but I'm not a lawyer. So if somebody said, "Hey, I'm going to go across, because I can stay for 6 months as a visitor, right? So I'm just going to say I'm visiting, I'm traveling, I'm a tourist. But that's the wrong, you can't lie to these people. You can't tell them one thing when you really mean another, because you're going to wind up having a whole other set of problems later, right?
Most likely. Yeah, most likely. So it really is one of those things where you want to plan ahead. And like I said, include it in all of the preparations that you have to do. That would be my first advice. If it happens that you weren't able to do that and you're now facing the situation where you need to move and it wasn't done, then have that meeting with the lawyer to work out something that's going to be legal, that's going to work with the timeline. And perhaps, for example, the spouse who's now married, who's Canadian, might have a standalone right for a visa independent of the spouse. So we might bring that spouse on, let's say a TN, right, which is a great visa for Canadian Americans, with a job offer, right? And then in the US, then we would change his or her status by doing what's called an adjustment of status based on the marriage. So that's, again, all
so you're coming in for an employment opportunity, and then the marriage is coincident with that. Got it.
Right.
Now, is there a difference in process for someone who's just getting married or about to get married versus a couple that they've been married, they've been living in Canada, for example, for 15 or 20 years, and they wish to move to the United States? So we have an established marriage, and one of them is an American citizen, the other's a Canadian citizen, and they say, look, we'd now like to, work has taken us over there. Is that an easier process because they've been married a long time? Like, is there a difference between new marriages and old marriages?
Well, that would probably go to the good faith factor of the marriage. So once an officer looks at a sponsorship application by a married couple, they're going to assess the good faith of the marriage. And this is where I have plenty of funny stories. I mean, I really think we should have like a reality show on immigration lawyers, because the stuff we see is really hilarious.
Okay? So give me an example of some zany story about where this has happened. You got to be careful to change the names here to protect the innocent,
I'm
right?
not even going to use names, and I would change the facts. Let me think about it. But what I was going to tell you is the sponsorship has to happen one way or another, whether it happens before or it happens after. Consult with the lawyer, find out how to do it. And I think the work permission is part of that. You file for a work permission as you file for an adjustment of status and a sponsorship. Okay. So there's different steps within the step of sponsorship. There's also travel permission, because once a couple is in the US and they do a sponsorship for marriage, there is a period of time where the sponsored person cannot travel out of the US, or that sponsorship would be deemed abandoned. So you have to apply for a work permission as well as a travel document. So those are all pieces of the application that people don't often realize.
No, but is this like you can't travel for 3 weeks, or is it 3 months? Like how limiting would that be for people? What would that timeline look like?
It's usually about 90 days, approximately.
Okay.
And all these time zones are, like, time assessments are subject to change on based on how busy the visa offices are. Okay. So
wow, that's a whole other wrinkle that I don't think most people would be aware of. So this is important, because I think when people are getting married, they realize that there's lots of change, and that would make sense that there's probably things to do in the immigration side. But I think for a couple that's been married a long time, they would just assume that, well, we're married, why can't we do this? Like, our cell phones will work, so why can't we just get in the car and go? So you're right, they do need to be very mindful that the same rules will apply to them.
It's the same with your field, right? The finances. People might move and then realize after the fact, oops, you want to.
They always screw this up. Yeah, that's why we have a great practice, right?
So I really think that a move is often seen, especially between U.S. and Canada, which is, I think, why we wanted to do this podcast series. Yeah. Is that, like you said, the phone works and the border is so porous. And we've been doing this for years, right? Like, I was a cross-border shopper since I was 5. I mean, who bought stuff in Montreal? You just went to Target, right, in the U.S.
Right, and we all have the same, celebrities, but people. There are different processes. It's like we're 2 different countries or something like that. It's really weird.
Very much.
But I think what you and I see quite often, and we see this with the financial decisions, where people will move and they don't realize that the systems don't align, the investment systems, the compliance systems, and they're wildly different. And my friend from Newfoundland has a great word. He says it's tangly, and it tangles people up. And you have the same issue with immigration rules. It's way more complicated than people think it is. And you and I usually, I'd say 70 or 80% of the situations we get are people that have done things and then not realize they've tangled themselves up. Right. It's not as frequent that people come to us in advance and say, how do I do this fairly seamlessly? What are the things I have to be mindful of or attend to, or structures or things I can put in place to make my move easier? If you're listening to this and you haven't moved yet, call us and we will show you all the potholes and the barbed wire and all the other stuff that you're going to get caught up in this, legal and compliance and tax fence that you got to jump through. So we want to know how to untangle it. And that's where it's expensive and problematic. And in your case with the border, you've got people with guns that if you don't do it right, not to scare anybody, but now let me add another wrinkle into this. And you have a family that's in Canada and they want to move to the United States or vice versa. And and so one is an American citizen, one's a Canadian citizen, but they have children. Do the kids have these rules? Like, are the children automatically dual citizens? Are they just one or the other based on where they're born? How does the complexity of the child enter into all of this?
That's a very good question. Okay, so one of the things that I do really like is that children who have one parent who's American, one parent who's Canadian, have an entitlement to citizenship through that parent. So the U.S. and the Canadian side have different ways of securing. In Canada, let's say it's called proof of citizenship. Unfortunately, once again, it's an 11-month wait time at this time. But
wow.
We will treat the child, depending on their situation, a little bit differently than the sponsored spouse. And in some situations, we will have the child also go through the sponsorship. It really depends on the case. But yeah, kids have a little bit of a different treatment than the adults, a little bit.
Now, are there also things that a Canadian-born child of an American parent, do they have to, at age 18, pick a citizenship or renounce a citizenship? Is there anything, because I remember hearing a little bit about this, and maybe other people heard this, that when the kid's 18, they need to do something to validate. Is that true, or is that just a myth?
Yeah, for the U.S., that is true. I have friends in that situation. And, the general advice I have is take care of it before the child turns 18. It's a lot simpler, right? So once again, when you have those talks before or as part of your relocation and mobility strategy, you can plan ahead. This is always harder to do once you've moved. And like you said, we're untangling for people. Planning ahead is better.
Now, alongside that, one thing that we often see is the people that don't consider themselves to be a citizen of a country that they were born in. And this is a very common issue on the Canadian side, where we have what I call the accidental American. So the person that says, look, I was born, or my parents were American and I got a passport, or I happen to be born there, but I've never lived there. I'm not American. I mean, yeah, my passport says I was born in Michigan, but I'm not. So they perceive themselves to be Canadian, not American, despite where they were born. Do they have any complexity, or can they just ignore the fact that they're American and just say, look, I am Canadian, so none of those rules apply to me?
And you're talking about immigration rules, or?
So yeah, so they just say, look, the tax thing's a whole other issue, which we'll talk through separately. But from an immigration perspective, do you often encounter that where somebody says, look, I'm American, or I wasn't born there. But all the rules still apply, whether you think you're a citizen or not, right? Because it comes with you.
Absolutely. Listen, my response to that has changed in recent years. When this may go against some of the advice that you might give, and something that we should talk about together. But I think that the more citizenships a person has, the better. And in fact, there is a high net worth citizenship trend, let's call it, right now, of people who want to secure as many passports as possible simply because of the instability in the world. And we've seen it. We don't have to look far to see what happened with Ukraine, and then boom with Israel, and then boom, name the next place. I don't know. But the reality is, if people want to move, and we've had those requests, we've had people saying, listen, you know what? I don't know where the world is going. I don't know who's coming into power. But this is my opinion, and I want to be able to get the heck out of here, whether it's out of the US or out of Canada. And that is something that I see growing more and more now. And people seem to be wanting to be much more mobile and have that
Right.
extra passport in their safety deposit box if case for whatever reason they might need it. So that might surprise you. My answer, if I said somebody said to me, "Oh, I don't consider myself American," I would rarely recommend a renunciation of that citizenship unless they ran it by you and you said to me, "For this person, it makes a lot of sense because of the dollars and cents attached to it, right? On taxes or however." But other than that, I would say to people, this is gold. Okay. There are places in the world where they will sell their children to get one of these passports.
Oh yeah, they'll get in a boat and row it 90 miles across an ocean full of sharks to get to this, right?
Really,
Yeah.
so I don't, I think people should see that as an advantage as opposed to, something holding them back.
Well, it's interesting we talk about what some of those catalysts are that make people say, I want to move, I want to do this. And the renunciation of a citizenship in the US, we tend to see that when people are, they've had a green card in the US, they're coming back to Canada, or the accidental American saying, like, I was never American. And usually the trigger for that is that there's only two countries in the world that tax based on citizenship, and it's the United States and Estonia. So for them, it doesn't matter if you don't live in the United States. You always have to file U.S. tax returns, and you may or may not pay taxes. It depends on where else you live and what's happening, but you have to file. You have an obligation. And people are like, I don't want to be bothered with this. So if I have no desire to be in the United States or whatever, why am I still dealing with this? So there is a process which could be very costly, actually. So people have to be very careful of it. But I think what you're touching on is a very important idea that people want optionality, because the world is moving a lot. And what you perceive is good for you or your family from economics or safety or whatever it is, that's moving. And there's been, as you say, you don't have to look far to see what's stressing people out. And I think so we're seeing some people that are Canadians that are saying, what else can I do? Because Canada's tax system is not based on citizenship. It's based on residency. So you can depart Canada if you don't live here anymore, but you get to retain your citizenship. Now, again, there is a process, might be expensive, but people are saying, well, if I don't want to be part of this tax code anymore for whatever reason, where else can I go? And then I have to figure out, can I actually stay in that other jurisdiction? So, and there's countries that are offering golden visas and other things to say, look, if you can come here, but here's the format, and they're trying to attract capital. And I think what we're seeing is an interest in that rising, not just because of what's going on in the world tax-wise, but also the technology you and I are using has enabled people, knowledge workers, to work anywhere. So and it may just be climate. Look, it's crappy out here in Oakville, Ontario right now. I mean, this would be much nicer in Dominican Republic or Bahamas or Portugal or something, right?
Right.
So we're seeing that mobility increase. But you're right. There might be a lot of catalysts for it. There might be economic, political, weather, right? But they have to do it properly.
Absolutely. Like I said all along, planning is better. Prevention is better than, what's the expression? You don't want to undo the damage. Untangling is costlier than. And listen, when I think about what a consultation with an immigration lawyer costs, and people are always fighting to find free consultations. Well, first of all, you get what you pay for in life. Number one.
Right.
Number two,
I had a friend of mine who said, you want to pay peanuts, get a monkey.
Right.
I love that line. So, yeah.
I like that. So the reality is, what is it? A consultation? It's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket, especially when people are planning big weddings and everything else. I mean, I still would say that the cost of a sponsorship might be less than the cost of a wedding dress. I say this because I married a daughter, and I really somehow wonder why people are so hesitant to look at the complexities of the immigration program and think somehow they can do it, or it's not important. This is as important. You're going to spend all this money on a wedding and then get separated at the border. And I've seen that time and time again, that people don't consider this as important as it is. And I would caution them greatly to say this is as important, if not more, because if you don't have that ability to move together, like everything else is secondary, right? Are you really getting married for the right reasons? And are you going to be able to live together? Just it's upside down, really, sometimes.
Well, I think good advice is if you want to spend a lot of money, do it wrong. And this is why Brian Baumler and Mike Holmes have TV shows, right? Just renovate your kitchen by yourself and discover what that was really worth. And I think part of the problem is that, like everybody knows this, but yet people will still attempt it. And I think part of the problem is the internet, right? Like WebMD for doctors and all the ways people can Google what they think the answer is and get like TikTok is full of wildly, shockingly bad financial advice. And playing the home game in this area is really not a good idea.
Nope. And forums are the worst. People who post say, well, this is what happened to me, you'll be fine. What? Like, why would you say that? And then the person might attempt it and be met with a very different response because their situation had a little factor that made it, sometimes the little tiniest difference can change the fact scenario and the solution fully. So I wouldn't be doing this work if there wasn't work to be done. It's a great area for lawyers to be in. I think immigration is a positive thing. We help people. We give them something. Most lawyers, don't do that. They undo damage. But we can help people plan forward, and it's a positive thing, as opposed to, oh, no, my divorce lawyer. Oh, no, my bankruptcy lawyer. I mean, for lawyers, we have a really rough rep in a lot of areas. But I always say, when I switched from family law to immigration, I started getting cookies and gifts. It was great.
Yeah, you got friends all of a sudden, right? You didn't have any of those before. Yeah. Well, I just think, look, most people don't do this very well. And if you think just being in line at the airport with the person in front of you who apparently is never, every time I go through airport security, I have all the people who've never done it before in front of me. And that's easy stuff. So one of the things that we should also talk about really quickly is, as people are going through this, who do you think they should have kind of on their team to deal with some of this complexity? So they want to move to Canada, the United States, along with an immigration consultant or an immigration attorney, help them make sure they do that part right, because that's really essential of getting across. Who are some of the other, or what are some of the other professionals or areas that they really have to get expert advice in? Who do you think they should kind of assemble around them or seek advice from?
Well, depending on the family, I would say immigration, I would say financial, such as yourself, tax. And we know people in this who are cross-border tax experts, because we know that a Canadian tax expert might not agree with a U.S. tax expert, and the client can be lost in between.
Right.
Problem.
That's right.
So, and I would say, if the person has a business, then they will probably want to consult a corporate lawyer who ideally has dual licensing, U.S., Canada, but if not, a corporate
There's
lawyer.
like 5 of those.
Right. It's like
5 of them.
I know. But that is important. What's going to happen with the business and cross-border trade, right? Imports, export. That is a category of specialty within immigration. Yeah. I do not do it. I know people who do. And then lastly, we don't have him on today, Freddie, but somebody who can advise them about moving, purchasing property, renting property.
Accessing credit, right.
Exactly, all of that. So it's a team. That's a team. But, start with one person, and that person, as a righteous professional, will send you to the other people you need, Well,
and I think that's an important element. So if people are looking for someone that can help them, I think it's not just that person, but who are they connected with? Because they should have fellow travelers that are complementary services, right? So it's like, you have to be a guy who knows a guy. That's my joke. Because we have to know where the other professionals are, and we have to know the right answers from them, right? This is something that, we have 5 CFPs in our team. We can't give tax advice, but we're pretty sure we know what the right answers are supposed to be. Right. And you made a really good point of someone having an expert in one country, expert in the other. Well, if they're not an expertise, if their expertise isn't in both countries, because you have Canada, you have US, and then you have the gap in the middle, which is the tax treating, its other issues. They can often, and we see this in the financial world all the time, someone's got a US and a Canadian accountant. No, I need a cross-border accountant to see how do the tax treaty apply, because they'll often get it wrong, and they'll create structures and things that are great for one country, but terrible in the other. And the problem for the client is they don't know how to referee this match. Right. And I can appreciate the confusion. Years ago, I had to get my roof redone, and I got 3 different quotes from roofers. And how do I know? I don't know anything about roofing. Now I got to learn about roofing to pick these apart. So that's another element that I recommend when people are looking for professionals, not just what's their skill level, but whom else do they know because you're
Right.
going to need, a legal and a financial you also, like in our case, we've had to help people physically move their stuff. So we've had to connect them with people that, and you watch this on CBC Marketplace, they'll show a moving company and then the guy won't unload the truck for another $5,000. So they're scammed. We have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
We can tell the story about a guy moving at a very expensive whiskey collection. Well, you're only allowed to bring 2 bottles across the border duty free. What's with this? Like what? So we had to navigate. How do you find an exception and exemption for way more than 2 bottles when they're for personal use, right? So there's all these complexities that come about. We've had to help people find realtors. We had a client buy a house because the realtor walked through the house with their phone and filmed everything. So there's all this complexity that people, and I think it's about, does the person you're dealing with have a network? Right. So I think you'd agree that's probably valuable. That's how you and I know each other. Right.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Absolutely. No, it's important, and not a person can't be a jack of all trades. I really believe that firmly. I thought otherwise when I was younger. As I get older and wiser, I know this to be the truth. And so a person who says that they are, oh yeah, I know it. Be careful. I'm just saying it may be that they're right, but go check it out. Go get a second opinion. Make sure. That's the other thing. We always get second opinions, sometimes third opinions, like you said, for your engaging a roofer, but for our health, right? People go say, oh, this doctor said this. Let me see what this one thinks. The same here. There's nothing wrong with that. You can get a second opinion and I don't get insulted if somebody calls me and says, look, I have a lawyer, but I just wanted to run some things by you, make sure I'm on the right track. I love that. That tells me it's an educated client. And I absolutely will make sure that I'm not there to steal the case or mow anyone's lawn. I send it back to that lawyer. Say, go back to your lawyer now. He or she seems to be saying the right thing, and good luck. I'm here if you ever need me, but I think they're doing fine. I have plenty of work. The only other thing is sometimes if a person comes and we hear that there's a problem, that becomes a little touchy. So, my job is to tell the person what I believe. And also then there's also risk levels, right? So I'm a low risk lawyer. I don't want calls from the border saying, I don't want that.
I'm in cuffs. I have one phone call, Veronique? Don't hang up, right? I got one phone call. No, you don't want that.
They do give you more than one phone call. You can call your lawyer from the border, but that's not.
I only know from watching, Law and Order on TV. I don't actually have experience with this.
Criminal law. That's criminal law. No. So I told you we need the reality show for immigration lawyers. We do. We do. They're really funny stories. I prepared this client perfectly to cross the border. Everything's fine, and I get that call from the border. And what's wrong? Officer says, I'm coming in. I don't have the right visa. I should have a work visa. I said, work visa? But no, we discussed this. You're going in for a business visit. This is just a meeting. This is not, I don't know. He doesn't like all the stuff that's in my truck. What?
What's in your truck?
What truck? What stuff? So here's the part that the client didn't tell me is that even though we discussed everything, he's going to ride his truck with all his equipment to do hands-on work so once again, you have to hope that the client will understand the concept. If a client is coming in just for a meeting and a business meeting, and he or she should be dressed nicely with a laptop. That's it. A phone. And by the way, we talked about this before. The immigration authorities can look through your phone. Okay. So if they're coming in with a truck full of stuff, this guy, great guy, Motley Crue t-shirt, like he looked like a worker. I said, what? You wore a suit at our meeting.
I think as part of their homework, they have to watch reruns of Border Security, that TV show, to go, oh, that's really what happens, right? Well, so I want to circle back to something else that I think is connected to this idea of having that community of other professionals. And one little tip for people when they're looking for a lawyer, accountant, attorney, a financial person, is that in the cross-border space, it's a relatively small community. So part of the vetting process is like, who else knows them, right? So I'd say in the cross-border space, everybody kind of knows everybody that's an expert at it. So it's not that hard to do some due diligence on the person you're generally going to be talking with or interviewing, because they're probably known to the accountants and the community and the lawyers. So if you're going to be out shopping for someone who says they know this space, it's not hard to figure out kind of where they come from and do other people perceive them to be an expert. So that's one way to kind of validate someone who might be advertising. So, or that you tripped over, right? Go and find out who else is in the space, and they'll probably know each other.
That's correct. Right. And for sure, in terms of my community of cross-border lawyers, I know who's who, and everyone knows me, and we're part of panels, and we're part of, associations and different groups and working groups. We work with the government. I mean, I was part 1 year of a working group for the CBSA. So we were the liaison between the bar and the guys at the border, CBSA. So we were getting the information right away. And we were able to go back and say to the officers, what is it that you want to see when somebody comes to you? And the officer would say, you know what, just be ready. Come to me with a full package of information. Don't just come and go, what do you need, officer? Because we got a lineup of people.
And these are great tips that, you can read the manual, but you got to know the detail of what to do, right?
Yeah. But you also, on the flip side, don't want to come and tell the officer what they should be doing, right? Don't show up with your Kurz van at the border and say, officer, I know what you need to be doing here. Because guess what? I don't know if you'll get in, okay? Because these guys have more training than most of us. While they are not the ones sitting at USCIS in our office, the guys at the border and the people at the border have some training in immigration, and they are there to assist. But they, like you said earlier, are the ones with the gun. They are the ones who make the final call, and they have full discretion. So definitely.
And their power is amazing. Like they're the most powerful person in the universe when you're crossing the border. If they turn you around, it's a disaster. It can be really, really problematic, right? So, and they can just not like your face in a way and send you away. So it's a really, really tricky thing. And I don't think people realize it. Like I've watched people get in little arguments at when I'm crossing the border at the airport, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, just be really nice to that person for 30 seconds. Just be nicer than you've ever been.
Yes, it's so correct what you're saying. It's so correct. It's really important to be, I call it humble. You got to be humble at the border, and as opposed to antagonistic. I had a client once who said to the officer, why is it taking so long? I mean, it's just the backyard of the United States. It's Canada. Oh boy, this guy didn't get in, okay? Because that's just enough to trigger, the backup of somebody who's devoted their life to protecting the border and ensuring compliance with the laws. Don't come there with an attitude. We generally border coach our clients who are going to cross to make sure we can tell them that. If I pick up on an attitude by the client, I know how to humble them pretty quick. By telling
you're going to give them the rehearsal smackdown. You're going to just do that in rehearsal. You're going to smarten them up.
Every lawyer does it, but I do, because at the end of the day, we can prepare the best package, but if the client shows up at the border and doesn't present it well or cops an attitude, they're not getting in. It was the best package. Everything was fine, but like you said, the officer didn't like their face or found them rude and didn't believe them. And so untangling all that afterwards is very difficult. They can also make an exclusion order, so people need to be aware. They can prevent a person from coming back before making a separate application to re-enter. There's a lot of damage that can happen.
Wow.
Yeah?
Okay, so tread carefully here. Put Véronique in your corner. She'll tune you up before you go. So, all right. Well, look, this was a great conversation, and I'm glad we talked about some of those various scenarios. And obviously, there's even more ways that this can tangle people up. So with that, we'll be back to talk about more ways that the border is complicated. And I'm glad you are on our team to help our clients when they've got some of these situations for themselves, their families, their coworkers, or colleagues. So with thank you very much for your time today.
Give it to me.
Okay, we'll do the gang signs again. Okay. All right. I have to give you a quarter as a royalty on that one. Thank you, Véronique. We'll see you again.
This has been Two-Way Traffic with Darren Coleman of Portage Cross-Border Wealth Management. Thanks for watching and listening. If you have any questions or comments or ideas for new episodes, send us an email at twowaypodcast@gmail.com. And you can find the Two-Way Traffic Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. This series is a production of the Acme Podcasting Company.
On behalf of the Two-Way Traffic Podcast and Portage Wealth of Raymond James, thank you for listening to this conversation. This podcast has been prepared by and express the opinions of Darren Coleman and his guests and are not necessarily the opinions of Raymond James Ltd. Statistics, data, and other information presented are from sources Raymond James believes to be reliable, but their accuracy cannot be guaranteed. This podcast is for information purposes only and is not construed as an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of securities. Investors considering any investment should consult with their investment advisor to ensure that it is suitable for the investor's circumstances and risk tolerance before making any investment decision. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Information provided in this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as providing legal, accounting, and/or tax advice. Should viewers have any specific questions or issues in these areas, please consult your legal, tax, and/or accounting advisor. Raymond James Ltd. is a member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Raymond James USA Ltd. is a member of FINRA and SIPC. Raymond James Ltd. and Raymond James USA Ltd. financial advisors may only transact businesses in provinces and/or states where they're registered.